You are walking through a dense prehistoric forest with nothing but your hunger and your wits. One wrong bite of a berry could mean a slow, agonizing death, yet your ancestors survived for millions of years to get you here today. How did they know? It wasn't a biology textbook, it wasn't a Google search. It was a brutal, high stakes game of trial and error that lasted for tens of thousands of years. Imagine standing in a lush green landscape during the Upper Paleolithic period. You have been foraging for hours. Your stomach is cramping. You see a cluster of bright, shiny red berries. They look delicious. But your brain screams, "Don't touch it." How did humans learn to distinguish between the life giving harvest and the deadly toxin? It started with a combination of instinct, observation, and the cold reality of shared tragedy. First, let's talk about the universal deterrent: bitterness. Evolutionary biology has hardwired the human tongue to detect alkaloids. Alkaloids are the primary chemical weapons used by plants to stop herbivores from eating them. Strychnine, nicotine, caffeine, and morphine are all alkaloids. When we taste something bitter, our primitive brain triggers a gag reflex. It is a biological warning label that has kept us alive since we were tree dwelling primates. However, bitterness is not a perfect system. Not all bitter plants are poisonous, and some deadly plants actually taste sweet. The deathcap mushroom, for example, is notoriously pleasant to eat. This is where observation became our greatest survival tool. Early humans were the ultimate students of the natural world. They watched animals. If a squirrel ate a specific leaf and stayed healthy, the humans took note. If a deer avoided a certain patch of shrubbery, they steered clear of it too. This is known as zoopharmacognosy. Animals have an incredible knack for self medicating and avoiding toxic flora. Humans spent generations mapping these behaviors into their collective consciousness. But observation wasn't enough. We needed a systematic testing protocol. Anthropologists believe that early hunter gatherers developed a multi stage approach to identifying new food sources. They called it the universal edibility test, though it was far from scientific by modern standards. First, they used the skin. They would rub a small portion of the plant on their wrist or the inside of their elbow. If the skin turned red, itched, or developed a rash, the plant was marked as off limits. If it passed that, they would hold a piece of the plant to their lips for a few minutes. Any burning or tingling sensation meant immediate rejection. If it passed the lip test, they moved to the tongue. They would touch it to their tongue for a few minutes without swallowing. If no numbness or pain occurred, they would chew a tiny piece and hold it in their mouth for 15 minutes. If there was no reaction, they would swallow a tiny amount and wait. They would wait for 8 hours. 8 hours of checking for nausea, cramps, or dizziness. If they survived the night, they were one step closer to adding that plant to their dietary arsenal. This wasn't just a process, it was a ritual of survival. You have to realize that this knowledge was passed down through oral tradition. Every tribe had an elder, a keeper of the green knowledge. These individuals were essentially the first pharmacologists. They knew that the roots of a plant might be lethal, but the leaves could be boiled 3 times to remove the toxins. Consider the process of leaching. Many plants contain tannins or cyanogenic glycosides that are dangerous in their raw state. Think about acorns. Raw acorns are high in tannins, which can cause severe kidney damage. But early humans discovered that if you crush them and soak them in running water for several days, the toxins wash away. This process of trial and error was passed down through thousands of years of culture. Let's look at the statistics of the era. Life expectancy in the Paleolithic era was roughly 30 to 35 years. Mortality was high, and food poisoning was a common cause of death. But as groups grew larger, this knowledge became a competitive advantage. Groups that figured out how to detoxify wild tubers or identify medicinal roots had more energy, higher birth rates, and greater resilience. Then there is the social aspect. Think about the impact of the Neolithic Revolution roughly 12,000 years ago. When humans transitioned to agriculture, they weren't just picking plants, they were breeding them. They selected the seeds of plants that had the lowest levels of toxins. Over thousands of years, humans effectively domesticated our food. We literally bred the poison out of our vegetables. Look at the modern potato. It belongs to the nightshade family. Wild potatoes are packed with solanine, a glycoalkaloid that can cause death in humans. By selecting potatoes with lower solanine levels, our ancestors slowly turned a toxic weed into a global staple. But even with this progress, tragedy struck often. There are documented accounts of foragers in the 18th and 19th centuries accidentally consuming water hemlock, one of the most toxic plants in the northern hemisphere. A single bite of the root can kill an adult within hours by inducing systemic organ failure. These accidental deaths served as grim reminders of the boundaries of our knowledge. Think about the sheer amount of data humans had to process. A tribe living in the Amazon rainforest might have access to over 5,000 different plant species. How do you distinguish between the medicine, the food, and the poison in a list that long? They used what we call ethnobotanical classification. They created categories based on physical traits. They looked at the color of the sap. Milky white sap often signaled toxicity in many plants, like the Euphorbia genus. Yellow sap was another red flag. They looked at leaf shape, smell, and the time of year a plant blossomed. This wasn't just guessing, it was early systematic botany. We also have to consider the role of fire. Fire was the greatest detoxifier in human history. Heating food breaks down many plant-based toxins. It makes proteins more digestible and neutralizes enzymes that cause damage to our internal organs. By cooking our food, we expanded the range of plants we could eat by a factor of 10. Yet, despite all this, we still have a complicated relationship with toxic plants. Modern humans have a neophobia when it comes to bitter tastes. We have been conditioned for millions of years to be skeptical of new, unknown foods. Even today, if you were dropped in the woods, your natural instinct would be to ignore most things, even the things that are edible. We have moved so far away from our ancestral roots that we rely on grocery stores to do our testing for us. But the ghost of that ancestral fear is still there. Why do we hate Brussels sprouts? Why do kids find broccoli bitter? It is a leftover defensive mechanism. Our ancestors were the ones who were suspicious of the bitter stuff, and they were the ones who lived to tell the tale. Think about the complexity of medicine. Many of our most effective drugs today are derived from these very plants. Aspirin came from willow bark. Morphine came from the opium poppy. Digoxin, used for heart failure, came from the foxglove plant. These plants didn't evolve to kill us. They evolved to stop insects and fungi from eating them. We just happened to be in the crossfire. When we learned how to dose these plants, we moved from survival to medicine. We turned the forest's armor into our own armor. The real tragedy is that we are losing this knowledge. As we become more urbanized, the ability to read the landscape is vanishing. An average person today could not identify 5 edible plants in their local park, let alone know which ones could kill them. We are living in an era of unprecedented safety regarding our food, but we are also living in a state of deep ignorance. We have offloaded the burden of the universal edibility test to the food industry. We trust the label, the supermarket, and the regulatory board. But what if that trust was stripped away? How quickly would our species regain its lost instincts? Or have we traded our connection to the earth for the convenience of the shelf? Think about the legacy of that first human who decided to peel that specific root or boil those specific seeds. They were the bridge between the animal world and the civilization we inhabit today. They were the ones who dared to touch, to taste, and to suffer so that we wouldn't have to. When you sit down for your next meal, consider the silent, invisible labor of those thousands of generations who mapped the chemical landscape of our planet. They built our diet out of trial, error, and sacrifice. We are the beneficiaries of an ancient, global, and lethal experiment that spanned the entire history of our species. The next time you find yourself complaining about a bland meal, remember that at one point in human history, the most important question in the world was simply, "Will this kill me?" And the answer was often written in blood. Are we truly the masters of our environment, or are we just the lucky descendants of the ones who were just a little bit more cautious than everyone else?